Hello, this is again Dr. Jonathan Bentovish, and I'm recording an important presentation today entitled "What if Einstein was right? God's physics fulfills Einstein's quest for unifying field theory." Essentially, as I've presented many times before, first of all, there's been over 100 peer-reviewed scientific articles that have been published. And I've been invited to open international physics and astronomy conferences. There's been God's Physics book, a few editions of God's Physics book that came out in the US and worldwide. God's Physics today is, there's just been a special issue that came out and published at Research and Reviews, a journal of modern physics. With a special issue with 15 articles, breakthrough articles, which actually have brought God's physics to the point that God's physics today is regarded as a new scientific paradigm of 21st century physics or theoretical physics. And so what I want to present today is essentially outline this tremendous breakthrough in physics, theoretical physics, and acknowledging really Einstein's visionary quest for unifying field theory. So the title of today's presentation is "What if Einstein was right?" There's been, by the way, a book of mine called "What if Einstein was right?" which was published a few years ago, very successful. Anyway, the title of today's presentation is "What if Einstein was right? God's physics fulfills Einstein's quest for unifying field theory." And so I want to open up by essentially highlighting the fact that we stand today at a historic point, which is equivalent essentially to the empirical validation of Einstein's general relativity theory about 100 years ago. In 1919, everybody knows about this, but there was a unique critical prediction of Einstein's theory regarding the perihelion curvature of Mercury around the Sun. According to Einstein's critical prediction, the curvature of Mercury's perihelion around the Sun should be doubly curved relative to Newton's classical mechanics. And I'm giving a short introduction so that the general public can understand. By the way, God's Physics, a book in a few editions that came out, I've written that because I believe, and it will become apparent in this presentation as well, that God's physics, previously called the computational unified field theory, really fulfilling Einstein's quest for unifying field theory, which is the topic of today's presentation. But God's physics is a revolution not just in science. It's very important for science. It's a huge accomplishment. It fulfills Einstein's quest, as I'm going to talk about today. But it goes well beyond that. And the reason that I've written the God's Physics book and is coming out in a few editions in the world is because this revolution is not just for scientists. It's not just for physics and science. Again, it's making a tremendous revolution in science and in physics, advancing our scientific understanding of the origin, nature, and even purpose of the universe tremendously, and fulfilling Einstein's quest. But the message is much broader, so I'm going to speak about this later. We just have to bear in mind that this new revolution in science and in physics, akin to the revolution that took place 100 years ago in 1919 during the solar eclipse, when Eddington, the famous British astronomer, validated Einstein's unique critical prediction regarding this double valued curvature of Mercury around the Sun, in brackets due to the Sun's gravitational force curving space-time around the Sun, according to Einstein's theory, and that causes or brings about the double valued or double curvature of Mercury's pathway around the Sun. And we stand at a historic point, which is just equivalent to that. So I want to just explain, again, for the general public, people sometimes think that science is a sort of a static situation. Science, in fact, it does not remain static. And we had the famous philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, in 1962, wrote an influential book on the structure of scientific revolutions. And essentially, Thomas Kuhn taught the scientific community, has been well accepted by now, that the way that science evolves is based on alternation between phases in which science operates within a certain paradigm, a certain perception, a certain theory that describes the reality. Let's say Newtonian mechanics was true in the 19th century, but after a while, that phase in scientific development is called standard science or standard paradigm. So, for example, Newtonian mechanics was a standard paradigm. During the 19th century, everybody operated based on Newtonian mechanics. That was the basic framework of viewing the universe and viewing how physical reality operated. And then Thomas Kuhn tells us what people are usually, at least the layman, general public is not so aware of that. That's why I'm highlighting that. Thomas Kuhn tells us then comes a point where the standard paradigm is not sufficient any longer to explain the physical reality. What that means is that usually that was the case in Newtonian mechanics, and that's what Thomas Kuhn is telling us, that at a certain point, the standard paradigm, in this case Newtonian mechanics, reaches a dead end. That dead end, or how we called it, a paradigmatic crisis, is when we have certain signs or symptoms of distress of the old standard paradigm. And those symptoms of distress are, for example, a clash or an inconsistency between the foundations of that old standard paradigm. For example, in Newtonian mechanics, it contradicted Maxwellian electromagnetic theory, and that inconsistency or contradiction obviously cannot last for long. It has to be resolved. So that's one sign of distress of this paradigmatic crisis. The other sign of distress is the fact that the old paradigm, in this case Newtonian mechanics of 19th century physics, could not explain a major key phenomenon, which was the ether. The ether was a fine, hypothetical fine element that was supposed to perfuse the whole universe. And multiple experiments have been carried out. The most famous one is the Michelson-Morley experiment, trying to detect that elusive ether concept. It was supposed to be a very fine element perfusing or filling the whole universe, through which, for example, light and electromagnetic energy is supposed to pass through or be mediated through it. And so multiple experiments have been carried out. The Michelson-Morley is the most famous experiment. And for a long time, the scientific community could not validate this purely hypothetical, elusive ether concept. So these two signs of distress, this is what Thomas Kuhn is teaching us, when a standard paradigm, such as Newtonian mechanics, reaches a dead end, reaches a paradigmatic crisis, that's a situation in which two major symptoms arise. One is a contradiction within the foundations of this old standard paradigm. In this case, Newtonian mechanics contradicted Maxwellian electromagnetic theory. And the other thing is that that old paradigm, standard paradigm, cannot explain a major key phenomenon such as the existence of the ether, which, if the ether doesn't exist, then Newtonian mechanics had a big problem. So when we have this signs of distress or symptoms of paradigmatic crisis, Thomas Kuhn is teaching us, that's when science realizes that it has to start looking or seeking for a broader and more comprehensive new paradigm, new scientific paradigm. And also, so that's what happened when Einstein came out with his general theory of relativity, initially special relativity theory, and then general relativity theory. But that general relativity theory was supposed to resolve the inconsistency between electromagnetic theory, Maxwellian electromagnetic theory, and between Newtonian mechanics and Maxwellian electromagnetic theory. I'm just jumping ahead of myself because now I'm going to explain that we stand at an equivalent situation, because our situation right now is that we have also a contradiction between relativity theory, general relativity theory, considered to be the greatest single achievement of one individual human being scientist intellectually. So anyway, there's a contradiction between general relativity theory, talking about the macroscopic universe, galaxies and stars, etc., the whole universe, or the universe at large, and quantum mechanics, which is describing the subatomic realm of atoms and subatomic particles. So we stand at an equivalent point because there is a contradiction now between general relativity theory and quantum mechanics. That's an unbearable situation for long for science to stand in, and that's again a distressed sign or symptom signifying that science or physics, 20th century physics, finds itself in a paradigmatic crisis, which inevitably has to lead to the discovery of a new scientific paradigm that can both resolve the inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and also offer an explanation for this key phenomena in the case of 20th century physics, the same as the ether concept, which was key and it could not be detected in 20th century physics, which we're now in the 21st century, but the problems have not been resolved, except that God's physics new paradigm does resolve these problems and offers a much broader theoretical framework that actually advances science tremendously forward. So I'm just going to recap. When Thomas Kuhn is teaching us that science is not a static, does not describe a static state of knowledge. Science actually is a process of learning and development, and science alternates between phases of standard paradigms such as Newtonian mechanics in the 19th century and general relativity theory, let's say, and quantum mechanics in the 20th century. So there is a standard paradigm, and then that standard paradigm reaches a dead end when it starts having contradictions, such as in our case between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. There's a basic contradiction, and that cannot stand for long. And another sign of distress of this paradigmatic crisis is the appearance of a key phenomenon, empirical phenomenon that cannot be explained by the old paradigm, standard paradigm. In the case of 20th century physics, that phenomenon, which is equivalent to the ether problem, is the problem of dark matter, dark energy. And I'm just going to say this in a simple way, outline it. The old model, standard paradigm of relativity theory, general relativity theory, assumes that the expansion of the universe, when we look at galaxies, we see the farthest regions of the universe running away from us. So the universe is expanding, and it's expanding at an accelerated rate. And the furthest you go out in space or towards the edges of the universe, the quicker the acceleration occurs. So to explain that expansion of the universe, accelerated expansion of the universe, the old model, standard paradigm of Einstein's general relativity theory, assumes that there must exist purely hypothetical dark matter, dark energy. The problem is that those purely hypothetical dark matter, dark energy, first of all, they are supposed to comprise up to 95% of all the energy and the mass in the universe. In other words, according to the old model, the relativity theory, general relativity theory, most of the mass and the energy in the universe cannot be detected. 95%, in fact, of all the mass and energy in the universe cannot be detected. And so that's a major problem. And also, multiple experiments over the last 2 decades that have tried to detect that purely hypothetical dark matter, dark energy concepts, which are supposed to account for 94% of all the mass and energy in the universe. Multiple experiments for over 20 years have been carried out to try and detect that elusive dark matter, dark energy, purely hypothetical concept, and zilch, they've not been able to detect them. It's still a purely hypothetical concept which has no direct validation. So that those two symptoms of an inconsistency, theoretical inconsistency between general relativity theory, quantum mechanics, and the fact that the old model of the old paradigm of general relativity theory cannot account for the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. It assumes dark matter, dark energy, purely hypothetical concepts. It assumes that it comprises 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe, but yet it cannot be detected experimentally to signal to us the crisis, the paradigmatic crisis that 21st century physics finds itself in. Let me quote Scientific American. Over the last 6 months or so, there was an article whose title was The Last Stand of Dark Matter, Dark Energy. And essentially, Scientific American, a very prestigious scientific journal, essentially points out that unless very soon a direct empirical validation of the existence of dark matter, dark energy could be found, that old paradigm has to give way to a newer and a broader paradigm. Essentially, that's the implication of what that article is saying. Excuse me. And so, just to complete the analogy, so we spoke about Newtonian mechanics reaching a dead end when it was found to be in contradiction with Maxwellian electromagnetic theory, and when Newtonian mechanics could not explain the ether concept. Thomas Kuhn tells us, okay, when that's the situation, that signifies a paradigmatic crisis. After a paradigmatic crisis, there emerges a new paradigm, new scientific paradigm. In the case of Newtonian mechanics, this was general relativity theory. General relativity theory was able to resolve that apparent inconsistency between Newtonian mechanics and the Maxwellian electromagnetic theory, and was able to discard the ether concept as superfluous, as non-existent, and offer a broader theoretical framework in which, by the way, Newtonian mechanics became a special case. We stand at an equivalent historic point, a very exciting point, because at this point in time, God's physics, which was previously called the computational unified field theory, in honor of Einstein's visionary quest after such a unifying field theory, so this new God's physics paradigm has accomplished the two steps or the two major solutions for the old problems. In other words, God's physics was able to show, again, 100 plus peer-reviewed scientific articles published, multiple conferences that have opened as a keynote opening talk, etc. Special issues, including the one that's been published now by Research and Reviews, Journal of Modern Physics, with 15 articles, including validation of God's physics. New paradigm is more valid, I'm going to talk about this, than the predictions of both relativity theory and quantum mechanics. So it's established and it's being crowned as the new paradigm for 21st century physics. But I'm just saying, so according to Thomas Kuhn's analysis, over and beyond the fact that the new scientific paradigm has to resolve the inconsistencies of the old paradigm, in the case of God's physics, it's been shown that it's able to resolve the theoretical inconsistency between relativity theory, general relativity theory, and quantum mechanics. And it's also been shown to discard dark matter, dark energy, very much the same way that Einstein discarded the ether concept as superfluous. In one of those, or multiple of those 100 plus peer-reviewed scientific articles, the new God's physics paradigm discards dark matter, dark energy as superfluous, as non-existent, and essentially it offers a completely new way of explaining this accelerated rate of the universe's expansion, which already has empirical validation. And so the third step that is necessary to crown, so to speak, or to validate the new scientific paradigm, in our case, it's God's physics. In the case of Einstein's theory, it was Eddington's validation of the double-valued perihelion of Mercury around the Sun. So the third step, Thomas Kuhn is telling us, for the new paradigm, in this case God's physics, to be accepted by the scientific community, is when this new paradigm is able to identify at least one better still, more than that, but at least one critical prediction of the new paradigm, in this case God's physics paradigm, that can be shown that this prediction is more accurate than the corresponding prediction of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. Lo and behold, that we stand, and that's essentially what Eddington has done. And essentially, when Eddington was able to validate a unique critical prediction of Einstein, Einstein came up with this ingenious idea that if the perihelion curvature of Mercury around the Sun would be shown to be double the value, in his case it was 1.6 arc, Newtonian mechanics predicted 0.8 arc, Einstein's ingenious discovery, he called astronomers, cosmologists, to test and see whether in fact the curvature of Mercury around the Sun would be double the value of what Newtonian mechanics said. And when Eddington in the solar eclipse of 1919 actually validated Einstein's prediction as more valid than Newtonian, it was found to be 1.6 and not 0.8. Overnight, pretty much, Einstein's theory triumphed, and it became the new paradigm for 20th century physics, which is carrying out over to the 21st century physics, except that again we're in the same debacle, we're in the same dead end, so to speak, of a paradigmatic crisis, in this case between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and then God's physics enters into the picture and essentially is satisfying now the three conditions that Thomas Kuhn was talking about. Two of them we spoke about, which is essentially one, the fact that God's physics is able to resolve the apparent inconsistency between general relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and two, it's been able to discard and resolve this problem of discard dark matter, dark energy as superfluous, non-existent, and essentially offer a new alternative and actually validated now explanation of the universe's expansion. And three is the fact that God's physics also is identified by now already two, not one, but two critical predictions, which have been validated empirically, like Eddington's verification of Mercury's doubly valued curvature of Mercury around the Sun. That was a unique critical prediction of Einstein's relativity theory that triumphed over the corresponding prediction of Newtonian mechanics. And in this case, we have two critical predictions that have been validated of God's physics that are more valid than the corresponding predictions of both relativity theory and quantum mechanics. I won't get into too much details. I want to step back and just explain to the general public what's the discovery, the major discovery and the major advancement of God's physics, and how it's essentially been able to resolve the problem between the inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, how it's been able to offer an alternative explanation for the expansion of the universe, and then we'll talk about how it fulfills Einstein's quest, and then we'll talk about how it changes and metamorphosizes the general public's conception of the universe, its origin, sustenance, even the ultimate goal of the universe's development, and what it means for us, because it's a huge development for humanity as a whole. So I want to speak first about what's the major discovery made by God's physics. The major discovery made by God's physics is its discovery of a singular higher ordered universal computational / consciousness principle, acronym UCP. This universal computational / consciousness principle, UCP, according to God's physics, is a higher ordered computational or consciousness principle, universal consciousness principle, that essentially computes a series of frames, universal frames. I gave the cinematic film metaphor the same way that we would look at a film and we would see a whole world unfolding. We can see our hero driving on his bike, many things happening, etc. Like Einstein's famous picture balancing himself on a bike. In any event, we would see a whole world depicted in this film, but if we would stop the progression of the film, we would see that it's actually a series of frames. And even Einstein's, for example, movement on the bike and the energy of the bike in this film is really the displacement of those bike or bicycles from one frame to the other. It's a complex explanation, but essentially God's physics is saying that there is a new understanding of the universe, and that new understanding essentially says that we have this singular higher order universal computational / consciousness principle. That UCP computes a series of universal frames like the film frames, except this is universal frames for the whole universe. That these series of universal frames are computed and are produced at a tremendous, unfathomable rate of many trillions of frames per second. There's an equation that I may talk about, a universal computational formula, that talks about that rate in which the UCP creates those series of frames. That's given by c squared divided by Planck's constant, which gives us approximately 1.36 in the power of minus 50. So 50 zeros, that's many, many trillions of times per second that this UCP is producing a frame of the whole universe, and then it dissolves back into this UCP, and then it creates another subsequent frame, a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second, etc. after that, and then that dissolves back. So there's a series of frames that are being computed by this UCP at an incredible, unfathomable rate of, again, 1.36 in the power of minus 50. And the idea is that the UCP is computing at every trillionth of a second all the universe simultaneously, and every pixel, every small atom, every subatomic particle, every point in the universe is computed by the UCP simultaneously, and that UCP computes for every point the four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass. So that's a huge revolution. That discovery was shown capable of resolving the apparent inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. I won't get into the details, but essentially the fact that we have this higher ordered UCP and it's computing simultaneously all the points in the universe, and for each point, each pixel, the four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass, that was able to resolve the inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. For example, relativity theory talks about the constancy of the speed of light as the limit for the transmission of any information or effect across space and time. Quantum mechanics has the quantum entanglement phenomenon, which essentially shows something that seems to be inconsistent or contradictory. When you have two entangled particles and they're separated by space and time, a measurement in one of them would lead instantaneously, without the need for the speed of light to transfer any effect or information. So a measurement of one entangled particle would instantaneously cause or determine the complementary value of the other entangled particles. So that seems to violate the speed of light barrier for transmission of any effect or signal between across space and time. And the new God's physics paradigm and the discovery of this singular higher ordered UCP allows to gap and to resolve this problem, because it talks about the computation of the UCP simultaneously for all the points in the universe, and it talks about single spatial temporal, multiple spatial temporal, such as wave, and exhaustive spatial temporal computation, which is the whole frame. So it's able to resolve this problem. And then because of this discovery of the UCP, the other point that it has to resolve, remember, is this problem with the expansion of the universe. And the way, while discarding dark matter, dark energy as superfluous, much the same way that Einstein discarded the ether concept as superfluous, in both cases after many, many years of scientists trying to find that elusive ether, in this case dark matter, dark energy concepts, and not being able to find them. But in any event, the God's physics new paradigm is able to resolve this problem and offer an alternative explanation for the universe's expansion. How, you may ask? So because the UCP is now, there's another postulate in the God's physics new scientific paradigm, which is called the collective human consciousness focus. And essentially what that collective human consciousness focus postulate is postulating that whenever we have a large group of human beings and there is a collective human consciousness focus, such as during the Jewish Rosh Hashanah 2 days time interval in which millions of Jews all over the world are praying, focusing on that universal computational / consciousness principle. In religious terms, we would call it God. In scientific terms, we call it the UCP, Universal Consciousness Computational Principle. So the collective human consciousness focus postulate is telling us that whenever we have this collective human consciousness focus, such as during the Jewish Rosh Hashanah, 2 days time interval in which millions of Jews are focusing singularly on this UCP, that brings about an increase in the UCP's rate of expansion of the universe for the whole subsequent Jewish year. I've called cosmologists, astronomers, including this past, we just passed the Jewish Rosh Hashanah on September 16th and 17th, and I called astronomers, cosmologists all over the world to test and verify whether in fact before September 16th and 17th there was a lower rate of the universe's expansion as opposed to from September 16th, 17th and onwards, it's supposed to be a higher rate of expansion. I've not received yet data from my call to cosmologists, astronomers. I'm still waiting for astronomers, cosmologists to collaborate with me and verify that very specific prediction. But what I want to speak about is that there's already been a validation, a more indirect general validation of this unique critical prediction. And to explain that, I must point at the fact that, remember we said that in general relativity theory, the rate of the universe's expansion is supposed to increase at the furthest regions of the universe due to dark matter, dark energy that are pushing supposedly the galactic elements at the furthest regions of the universe quicker than in the center close to Earth. But that's not the major point. The major point is there is a problem, unresolved problem for general relativity theory. And that problem, I call it the cosmological astronomical gap in the universe's expansion rate. And according to there's a problem because when we measure the rate of expansion of the universe at the early stages of the universe's development, so that would be during the close to the Big Bang, the background radiation. When we measure the rate of the universe's expansion at the early stage of the universe and we compare them to the rate of the universe's expansion right now, we see that the rate has increased. So in other words, the astronomical measurements of today's rate of the universe's expansion are higher than the measurement of the background radiation more towards the early stages of the universe's development. That gap cannot be explained by relativity theory, because even if dark matter, dark energy were existent, I have canceled them, and it's a big problem because they could not be verified for the past 20 years. That's where Scientific American came out with the article that I quoted. Excuse me, saying the last stand of dark matter, dark energy. But in any event, even if dark matter, dark energy were existent, which I claim they're canceled, they cannot exist, and also, by the way, for theoretical reasons in the New God's physics paradigm, which I won't get into. But in any event, even if dark matter, dark energy could exist, they would still predict a constant rate of the universe's expansion. So in other words, the rate of the universe's expansion should not change in principle through dark matter, dark energy from the beginning of the universe to the contemporary rate of the universe's expansion. But yet, this unresolved problem of the rate of the universe's expansion, the increase in the universe's expansion over time, cannot be explained by the old model by dark matter, dark energy. In contradiction to that, God's physics prediction, unique prediction, is that as a result of the fact that every Jewish Rosh Hashanah there is an increase in the rate of the universe's expansion, so over a period of time, the rate of the universe's expansion would increase. It challenges, by the way, and there's a few articles that came out now, it challenges, by the way, or it may challenge the time scaling of the universe, because it puts the human consciousness and the human consciousness focus as a major determining factor of the increase in the universe's expansion. But I'm going to put this aside for a second. I'm just focusing on the fact that there's one of the two validations already validated unique critical predictions of God's physics new paradigm as more accurate than the predictions of general relativity theory and quantum mechanics. So regarding general relativity theory, the prediction was that according to God's physics, because of this collective human consciousness focus, which essentially says that every Jewish Shoshana there is an increase in the rate of the universe's expansion. I called it the universe's non-continuous increase in its accelerated expansion, UNKR, that will be the acronym, but the UNKR prediction is that the rate of the universe's expansion would increase over a period of time, and that's exactly corresponding to this gap between the early universe's expansion rate, which is lower than the contemporary rate of the universe's expansion, which is higher. So relativity theory can't explain that. It's a big problem. It's called a gap that cannot be explained. Dark matter, dark energy, even though they've not been identified, even according to them, or even if they did exist, still the rate of the universe expansion would remain constant rather than what we see in practice or empirically, that the rate is increased. That's the gap, the cosmological astronomical gap in the universe's expansion rate. So that's one critical prediction that actually shows that God's physics new paradigm is more valid than relativity theory. The other one, which I'm not going to get into now, it's been published, but it's called the proton radius puzzle findings. And again, the discovery of that singular higher order universal computational principle, UCP, computes, we said, every pixel, every point in the universe, miniature point in the universe, every subatomic particle, every planet, every object in the universe. It computes at the incredible rate of trillions of times per second, but for each universal frame, it computes the four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass. And the way that it computes mass has to do with spatial consistency. I won't get into that, but essentially, the second prediction, critical prediction of God's physics new paradigm, has to do with pointing at exactly the phenomenon of the proton radius puzzle, which cannot be explained by quantum mechanics, but has been predicted by God's physics. And it has to do with the computation of the UCP of the mass element of a certain particle, which would be more spatially consistent, and therefore the proton radius puzzle, the fact that the proton of a hydrogen atom would be smaller and more accurately measured when we have a particle that is heavier, such as a muon, encircle that proton as opposed to the electron, and that brings about this phenomenon of the proton radius puzzle, which supports the God's physics new model and does not support quantum mechanics. It's considered as a proton radius puzzle. It cannot be explained by quantum mechanics. So we stand at the historic point, we stand at the historic point equivalent to Eddington's validation of Einstein's critical prediction, and that historic point essentially is that God's physics has reached a point that it has been validated as more accurate. Two of its critical predictions have been validated as more accurate than the predictions of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and that's sufficient alongside what we spoke about, that God's physics was able to resolve the inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. It's been able to discard dark matter, dark energy, and offer an alternative explanation having to do with this collective human consciousness focus, expansion or increase in the expansion rate of the universe, and specifically those two predictions of the collective human consciousness focus and its explanation of the gap, the cosmological astronomical gap in the universe's expansion rate. That's on the side of relativity theory. And then in quantum mechanics, the proton radius puzzle, again, another critical prediction of God's physics new scientific paradigm, which has been shown to explain that proton-radius puzzle, as opposed to quantum mechanics, which cannot explain, therefore it's a puzzle for quantum mechanics. So we stand at a point which is really equivalent to Eddington's verification of Einstein's theory. And the scientific community is embracing and must embrace God's physics new paradigm, the computational unified field theory, God's physics new paradigm, as more valid and as actually as a satisfactory new scientific paradigm for 21st century physics. Now I want to move forward and explain, first of all, just generally what tremendous advancement this brings in science and how it fulfills Einstein's quest. And then I'll talk about the ramifications and the great hope and excitement that this theory is bringing to the general public, to humanity, especially in these troubled times, by the way. So Einstein's quest, I'm getting back to the topic of God's physics fulfills Einstein's quest for unifying field theory. We must realize Einstein's not just genius, but Einstein's visionary quest for a unifying field theory. Einstein was the father and the father of relativity theory, and he was the founding father, or one of the first contributors to quantum mechanics. He actually won the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, which has to do with quantum mechanics. But in any event, so Einstein realized that there is an inconsistency, as we started speaking about before, between general relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And he spent the second half of his illustrious scientific career, 30 years in Princeton and before, but he devoted all of his time to trying and finding this unifying field theory. As early as 1919, he started looking, or in 1920, he started looking for such unifying field theory, but especially during the second half of his career, the last 30 years of his life, he was looking all the time and seeking, trying to develop and discover this unifying field theory. Regardless of the fact that at the time, some of his colleagues did not appreciate this visionary quest. But it turns out that Einstein's visionary quest for this unifying field theory, which he wasn't able to complete, actually God's physics theory has a lot of resemblance, at least to the directions that Einstein was looking at in terms of a field theory, in terms of, in this case, it's a frame or exhaustive framework of the whole universe, like a field. But in any event, God's physics fulfills Einstein's quest. Einstein, as we all know, was able to unify in relativity theory between pairs of those four basic physical features. Space-time became a four-dimensional continuum. Energy-mass equivalence unified between them, E equals mc squared. Space-time is curved by massive objects, but still those four basic physical features are not completely unified. That was part of what Einstein was looking to unify both relativity theory and quantum mechanics, to unify the basic four physical features. Now we have another problem that we know about, is the four forces of nature. Three of them have been unified, but not with the gravitational force. Again, the same problem between quantum mechanics and relativity theory. So Einstein was looking for a theory, that unifying field theory, that can unify all these forces, unify relativity theory and quantum mechanics, unify the four forces in a sense. And that's exactly what God's physics is accomplishing. At the center of God's physics new scientific paradigm, there is the discovery of a universal computational formula, in which this UCP is shown to integrate between the various components of quantum mechanics relativity theory. They're completely combined within this universal computational formula. That universal computational formula also unifies for the first time between the four basic physicals of space, energy, time, and mass. I won't get into that. And it's also unifying the four basic physical forces, again, for the first time in physics. So God's physics is fulfilling Einstein's quest, and in many aspects, it's really advancing the same direction that Einstein was looking for. He was looking for a field theory, where the field would then unify between the various elements, God's physics is, in a sense, fulfilling his quest, because in this case, the field is really that universal frames, or a series of universal frames, and the UCP is computing within that field, or within that the whole universe as a universal frame. It's computing the degree of displacement changes or lack of changes between frames, both relative to the whole frame, that would be space and energy, and also relative to a certain object, the composition of that object between frames. Does it remain the same or it changes? That would correspond to space, to time and mass. And the universal computational formula is unifying these four basic physical features in one formula, unifying relativity theory and quantum mechanics, unifying the four the four forces of nature. It's a huge advancement for science. So now I think we're ready to explain why this theory is so profound and so important for the general public, for humanity in general. So I think in order to appreciate that, I think that it's important to mention a few more postulates of this new theory. This new theory describes, for the first time in physics, it describes a moral principle as important in the evolution. There's actually two elements that God's physics new paradigm is bringing into the picture of our understanding of the universe. First, there's a few elements. So first of all, I'll just highlight a few of the postulates that are really expanding our consciousness and changing the way that science and the general public views the universe. A few of them are quite profound, but nevertheless, as time advances or goes forward, I believe more and more of these postulates will be proven. Same way that, for example, the collective human consciousness focus has received initial validation based on this gap between the universe's early and later stage of expansion. So these postulates include, for example, two profound theoretical postulates. One of them I call the computational invariance principle. And essentially, it in very succinctly, I'll describe that. The UCP exists, according to God's physics new paradigm, both during the frame. Each frame is computed simultaneously by the UCP. It computes each spatial pixel in terms of its four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass. So the UCP exists both during the frames, and it actually creates all the points in the frame. And the UCP also exists in between frames. When we look at the universe in between two frames, if I wanted to give an analogy or a metaphor, the cinematic film metaphor, think about the film that we're watching. It happens quite quickly, 12 or 24 frames per second, so we don't realize there's gaps between the frames. But at least in the old projectors, projecting a film, you'd have a light beam that would be apparent in between every two frames. But it's happening so quickly we don't notice that. That would be equivalent to, metaphorically, to the fact that between every two universal frames, the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP. So when it dissolves back into this UCP, the whole universe doesn't exist. It's been dissolved and recapitulated back into this UCP. So the computational invariance principle tells us essentially that since the UCP exists both during the frames in which the UCP creates the universe, and it also exists in between the frames, at which time the universe doesn't exist, it's dissolved into the UCP, but the UCP does exist. So the UCP exists both in between the frames, where there's no universe existent, and also during the frames in which the UCP creates the universe, as opposed to the universe itself, or the four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass. They only exist, the physical universe only exists during the frames, as computed by the UCP, but it ceases to exist and dissolves back into the UCP in between frames. So the computational invariance principle tells us an astonishing new discovery, profound discovery, and that is that the universe, or the four physical features of the universe, of space, time, energy, and mass, those may be called computationally variant. The universe exists as a computational variant element. It only exists during the frames, but it doesn't exist in between the frames. The four physical features are computationally variant, because they exist only during the frames as computed by the UCP, but they cease to exist in between the frames, as opposed to the UCP, which is computationally invariant. It exists uniformly, consistently, and constantly both during the frames and in between the frames. And so the computational invariance principle is telling us that, contrary to our common sense, or to the previous materialistic material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, which assumes that the universe operates by cause and effect between material objects, that's the old paradigm. But contrary to that old paradigm, the new paradigm is telling us the universe exists only as a transient phenomenal appearance or manifestation of this UCP that actually ties us to the second profound postulate. So there's computational invariance principle that tells us the universe doesn't exist all the time. It exists only transiently during the frames, but ceases to exist in between frames. The only thing that exists all the time, uniformly, constantly, and continuously, is the UCP. And then the second postulate is universal consciousness principle, which essentially tells us there's only one reality, really. There's only one reality underlying and transcending the universe. That a singular reality is the UCP. The UCP exists without the physical universe in between the frames, and exists during the frames. It manifests as the universe. So there's only one reality, which is this universal consciousness reality. That universal conscious reality appears as the universe, or manifests through the universe during the frames, but it continues to exist without the universe in between the frames. There's only one reality, that's the universal conscious reality. So it's quite a profound change, because we start understanding that the universe doesn't exist as a solid reality. It doesn't exist all the time. In between the frames, it doesn't exist. During the frames, it's only being computed. It's only being a manifestation of this universal consciousness reality. As shocking as this realization is, it does advance science and humanity tremendously, because we start realizing there's a deeper reality, higher, deeper reality to the universe. The universe is a transient, phenomenal manifestation of this universal consciousness reality. And this universal conscious reality now, according to God's physics, has a few features, very important features. This universal conscious reality has this characteristics of what I call the dynamic moral principle. First time that a moral principle enters physics and enters science. The idea is that we have this universal conscious reality, we said is creating the universe, dissolving it, creating it, dissolving it. And the postulate about the dynamic equilibrium moral principle essentially says that there is a bank, what I call a multi-spatial reservoir bank, of all the universal frames of the past, of the present, and multiple possible frames of the future for each individual human being. It's quite mind-boggling, but still, that's what God's physics is telling us. The UCP, or the universal conscious reality, has infinite computational power or capabilities. And so what it does, because of the moral principle, and because the universal conscious reality has these characteristics, sublime characteristics of peace, harmony, morality, it's all one. There's nothing outside of it. And it has these characteristics of peace, harmony, morality. So morality, the dynamic equilibrium moral principle, is telling us that this UCP, or this universal conscious reality, balances any moral imbalance. So in other words, for example, when one person, I'll give a metaphor that I used actually in God's physics book, and that metaphor just is very illustrative. I gave a metaphor. I said that if we have a CEO driving in his car, private car, to a board meeting, annual board meeting, he's supposed to get a big bonus for the last year's performance. And by personal providence, we would say, there is a car accident just in front of him, or he's run into injured individuals that need help, need to be evacuated to a hospital. Now he has a moral choice to make, given that he can give this, he can evacuate them in a way that would not harm them, but could actually benefit them. So if he chooses to take one of these injured persons and rush them to the hospital and essentially cancel the meeting, postpone it, he doesn't know if he's going to get the prize or not. He has a moral choice. If he makes that moral choice to try and save the life of that person, the claim is that the UCP, or Universal Conscious Reality, would then select for that CEO an equivalent one of multiple possible futures in which his life will be spared or will be tried to be rescued the same way that he tries to rescue the life of another person. So the dynamic equilibrium moral principle is telling us when a person makes a moral choice, that triggers the selection, the UCP's selection of one of multiple possible choices, multiple possible frames or futures for that individual that saved another person's life or benefited another person, and vice versa. Oh, God forbid, if a person inflicted pain or suffering on another person, that person will have to experience the same equivalent negative situation unless he makes what I call teshuvah. That's a term borrowed from Jewish and Hasidic thought and wisdom, but teshuvah is a word denoting remorse and a conscious decision to not repeat that negative action. If a person has even done, God forbid, a negative moral choice, but he then makes a remorse, teshuvah, he tries to compensate that person. He makes a conscious choice that he will not repeat that action, or try his best to not repeat that action. The UCP will then rectify and not put that person within the one of the multiple possible futures in which he or she would have to experience that negative situation, because they've changed, they made teshuvah, they've changed their moral choice, and they're trying to rectify that behavior. But in any event, the idea is that there's a dynamic equilibrium moral principle governing the future of each individual human beings based on our moral choices. So that's one element, new element in science, that's telling us that how the world evolves, in this case individually, depends very much on our moral choices. The second vector, or the second major influence of the UCP, or Universal Conscious Reality, on the development of the universe is what I call the reverse time Geulah Goal hypothesis. That's quite a profound postulate, but essentially it tells us, and I'll give a metaphor that I've given in order to elucidate this profound postulate. I give a metaphor, and I said, when King Solomon had to plan the build-up, the planning and the construction of the temple, the Jewish temple, even though he's considered the wisest of men in the Bible, still he had to take an architect that would plan, provide him with a blueprint plan of how this temple would be constructed and how it would look like at the end result. In fact, I suggest that King Solomon in this metaphor planned the whole temple from the end ultimate state backwards. You have to plan it from the complete form of the temple with all of its immaculate design and parts, etc. From the completed form backwards to the beginning of the construction. And that's a metaphor because the God's physics postulate, the reverse time Geulah Goal hypothesis or postulate, postulates that the UCP has pre-planned the development of the universe from the end perfected state of the universe. That would be the Geulah Perfected State, which I'm going to get into. That's a state in which humanity and science recognize the singularity of this universal computational or consciousness reality, including its profound characteristics that we spoke about peace, harmony, morality, and humanity will start living and behaving according to that realization that there is this singular UCP, or universal conscious reality, and it's characterized and it operates the world by harmony, peace, and morality. So therefore humanity, we'll talk about this in a second, starts behaving in this Geulah perfected state accordingly. But the claim is that the UCP has pre-planned the whole development of the universe from the perfected, ultimate perfected Geulah state of the universe that we spoke about, backwards. So in other words, it's pre-planned the whole development of the universe from inanimate matter, animate plants, animals, human beings, and up to that perfected Geulah state of humanity. So the reverse time Geulah goal postulate talks about the fact that the UCP has pre-planned the development of the universe from inanimate matter, animate plants, animals, human beings, and up to this perfected Geulah state. And the exciting part is that we start realizing that now actually humanity, once science is recognizing and accepting God's physics as a new scientific paradigm for 21st century theoretical physics, in effect, because of God's physics, different postulates, including the understanding that the universe is not a static and solid and continuous phenomenon. The universe is a process of change, of manifestation of this universal conscious reality that's leading the universe from towards this Geulah perfected state. And so we start looking at the universe, both scientists and then laymen, the general public and humanity as a whole. We start realizing that we are now entering that perfected Geulah state of the universe's development. So if the UCP has pre-planned the whole development of the universe to reach from inanimate matter, animate animals, plants, animals, human beings, and then this perfected Geulah state in which humanity, in brackets science, will recognize the singularity of the UCP, or the universal conscious reality, and also recognize those attributes or sublime characteristics of this universal conscious reality, and live accordingly. And we are now at the point, because God's physics is being accepted as a new scientific paradigm of 21st century physics, we are now entering that Geulah perfected state. That's the message, which is quite profound, quite exciting, and historic really for the whole of humanity, not just for science and scientists. Because for the general public, we start realizing that the world doesn't operate by mere cause and effect. I won't get into this now. It's been published, and I've lectured about this, including many videos that the general public can look at in YouTube. And I've been interviewed about this across the world. But essentially, the world doesn't operate by cause and effect. The world operates by this UCP advancing the universe through these stages of inanimate matter, animate plants, animals, human beings, and now it's reached the point of humanity and science recognizing this UCP, universal conscious reality, as the sole singular reality behind the universe, pushing the universe and human beings and humanity towards this perfected Geulah state. And we are entering this perfected Geulah state. So for the general public, because this video is very much geared towards the general public and not just scientists, let's say just a few concluding remarks. We find ourselves at this point in a tremendous strife in the world. There is the terrible attack that's just taken place on Israel, with many victims and hostages, etc. We pray for the recovery and release of the hostages, etc. There's the Ukrainian war. There's strife almost across the globe. And humanity is in a very difficult stage. And here comes God's physics and tells us that contrary to the old material causal paradigm, which essentially said that everything is random, the world has been created by a Big Bang, nuclear event, random event, it's leading to destruction, it's leading to dissipation of the suns, galaxies, life on Earth, etc. Everything is random. The new God's physics paradigm tells us something much more hopeful and much more purposeful, and gives humanity a great hope. And not just hope, I believe this will mold as time moves forward, and more scientists in the general humanity will recognize and realize and embrace God's physics new paradigm. We will see a major shift, and we are actually seeing already a shift in humanity's state of mind and behavior. So today the tolerance, for example, for violence is much lower. Humanity is recognizing that we cannot harm each other. And I'll give a metaphor that, the same way that a balanced human being would not take their right hand and inflict pain on their left hand, the same way, in a sense, the dynamic equilibrium moral principle and this God's physics and discovery of the singular higher ordered universal construality, which is typified by peace, harmony, morality, will push humanity and is pushing humanity to the point that we would realize that every human being that we meet, or every human being on the planet, is essentially like the right hand and the left hand. They're all part of this singular reality, and that singular reality cares very much about our moral choices. So we started viewing each other much more as brothers and sisters and part of the same singular higher ordered universal construality. So that gives us great hope, that brings humanity to a point where once the God's physics new paradigm is accepted widely, both scientifically, which is being accepted, and also by the general public, we will start seeing a major shift in humanity. Science and humanity will be investigating more and more this universal construality, would be influenced by this universal construality and the Geulah Perfected State, in which there would be complete peace and harmony. There would be complete cooperation, collaboration, and assistance of human beings across the globe. There would be an appreciation and an awe and feeling of gratitude towards this universal conscious reality. So we stand at a very significant historic point, not just for science. And I'm going to close the circle and say, this lecture is about God's physics fulfilling what if Einstein was right. Einstein was looking, this great scientist, preceded his age and was looking for this unifying field theory that would unify quantum mechanics, relativity theory. Einstein was quoted on saying God does not play with dice. Essentially, he was hinting at the fact that the universe must operate in an orderly and even purposeful manner. And so God's physics is fulfilling Einstein's quest. It's been able to unify between relativity theory and quantum mechanics, unify the four basic forces of nature, unifying between the four basic physical features. But over and beyond that, Einstein's quest has been fulfilled by God's physics, and it opens a new, complete horizon, a very hopeful and purposeful and good horizon for humanity, that humanity is starting to realize that we are being watched over, we're being cultivated and corrected and pushed towards that perfected Geulah state, which we're really entering now, where humanity and science are recognizing the singularity of universal construality. And hopefully, I will pray not just for the recovery of all the wounded and release of the hostages in Israel, the ending of the Ukrainian war, and release of all hostile activity there against Ukraine, and essentially humanity reaching a state of peace and harmony, humanity realizing that we are all, as I said, sisters and brothers, embracing this singular higher order universal conscious reality, and this would open a completely new era, not just for science, but also for humanity. Thank you very much.